We are ranking every dungeon from Tears of the Kingdom. This will hopefully make you temporarily forget that we will probably have to wait over a half a decade for the next Zelda game. Starting off, we have Hyrule Castle. I don't really consider this one a dungeon like it was in Breath of the Wild, but I know if I didn't include it, I would have to deal with comments asking why it wasn't on the list. Hyrule Castle does have some great loot and is worth visiting now and then, but the closest function it has to being an actual dungeon is towards the end of the game, where it's just a series of monster forces to defeat while chasing down an obviously fake Zelda. I really wish Hyrule Castle would have offered something fresh and new, but it really felt like they didn't know what to do with it in Tears of the Kingdom. Coming in at number 5 is the Water Temple. Easily the worst of the temples in the game, the Water Temple is both pathetic in scope and theming. Why a Zora dungeon was in the sky and amounted to just 4 sky islands and 1 interior is beyond me. The journey to this temple included a cave section with the Zora waterworks, which to me seemed like what obviously should have been the actual dungeon. It would have fit perfectly for the Zora, as their home across several games has lied within caves. This would have also given each of the 4 races a unique location for their temple, with the sky for the Rito, land for the Gerudo, depths for the Gorons, and caves for the Zora, leaving only the Spirit Temple as a duplicate in the depths. I will say, despite all my issues with the Water Temple, there were some pretty cool puzzles involving the low gravity and floating water bubbles. It just felt like it could have been so much more. Next up is the Construct Factory. I think people are kinda split on this one. I tend to think of it more positively than most. I like the element that you don't even realize you're in a dungeon until you're part of the way through this, and it's a nice surprise that sets it apart from the rest. Having to assemble the construct by getting each piece from a specific depot felt a lot more inspired than the other dungeons, which felt like they copy-pasted the terminal idea from Breath of the Wild. At least this time around, each thing you needed to find was something tangible that worked towards your goal. The Construct Factory also felt like the dungeon that encouraged doing things your own way, and even if you cheese something, it didn't feel like any less of an experience compared to the other dungeons. The Fire Temple is a dungeon I can fully admit I was wrong about. I think I went into the dungeon with the wrong mentality and ended up not liking it. In the short time since I played it for the first time, I've come around to appreciating what it has to offer. The Fire Temple is easily the most complex dungeon in the game, with its complicated series of minecart rails that can be manipulated to reach different pathways. It has some pretty cool theming, being the lost Goron city of Gordania, even if it does look a little bland at times. I think the biggest negative of this dungeon is the balance of difficulty in the gongs you have to ring. The first few are incredibly easy, but the last few are so tough to figure out that a lot of people resorted to cheesing them with the Send and Ultra Hand. While the Wind Temple might be the most Divine Beast-like dungeon in design, its Rito theming and atmosphere are incredibly well done. I thought many of the puzzles were really fun. I particularly enjoyed the creative uses of icicles to solve puzzles, including using them as a makeshift handle and attached to cogs to make a crank work. The Wind Temple acts as a great introductory dungeon, and for better or for worse, gives you an idea about what's in store for future dungeons in the game without overwhelming the player. At no surprise to many, the Lightning Temple gets the number 1 spot. The dungeon most resembles a traditional Zelda dungeon from past games in its structure. The Egyptian pyramid-themed dungeon worked perfectly with the reintroduction of the zombie-like Gibdo, who were littered all throughout this tomb. The heavy use of mirror puzzles was a joyful callback to a previous Gerudo dungeon, the Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time. The highlight of this dungeon for me was the beginning section, where you were simply just making your way through this mysterious structure with no clear goal yet. It gave me hopes that somehow this dungeon would be different than the rest. And while that dream was shattered once I made it to the central elevator room, the rest of the dungeon was still enjoyable enough for it to easily be my number 1 pick for Tears of the Kingdom. Let me know what your favorite dungeons were, and thank you for watching.